Joining us for more on tonight's topic is Larry Bowman, Executive Vice President at Pormort and Martin Insurance Agency, Don Hermey, Emergency Management Chief for Manatee County, and Ed McCrane, Emergency Management Chief for Sarasota County. Thank you all for being here. What an all-star cast to talk about this really interesting issue. But Larry, I want to start with you, and I want you to respond to Mr. Chevalier from Sarasota, who figures, well, I paid off my home. I really don't need flood insurance or all the other things. What would you say to him?
Well, you know, I always tell people what we don't want to see is any surprises. So, you know, if he's fully comfortable with taking that risk, then that's okay. I would say that it's a pretty big risk. I think there's a lot of other things that could cause damage to the home than just flying debris. If that roof came off or one of the windows, you know, was destroyed, you'd have some major damage.
Well, is it the fact that a lot of people are comfortable taking that risk? Only 29% of people have flood insurance, or is it that they don't know that they live in a flood zone and need it?
I think it's probably a little bit of both, but I would say that, I mean, when we talk to people that don't have insurance, that don't pay for either the windstorm or the flood, a lot of times we hear things like, well, you know, when was the last time we had a major storm hit Sarasota? And
famous last words.
Right, and so it's kind of scary, but at the same time, you know, all we try to do is provide them with all the facts and then let them make that decision. I personally would encourage any one of my family members and friends to not take that risk.
Now, the federal government has just changed the flood maps, meaning, as we said earlier, you could not have been in a flood area, and now that you are, how is this communicated to homeowners?
Well, there's a variety of ways. Both Manatee and Sarasota County have put on workshops. We have a team of people, including our floodplain managers, who explaining to people what this map change is, when it takes effect, giving people an opportunity to ask questions. On our website is probably the best place to go. I know for Sarasota County at www.scgov.net. There's a flood map modernization project information. There's frequently asked questions. There's a tool where you can put in your address to determine whether or not your home is in a flood zone, and that's what we encourage people to do.
And Don, you know, as we said, that so many people don't have flood insurance and have an attitude, well, I have not been hit, but has the risk evolved over time, at least the time that you have been in your position?
No, the risk has not changed. It's still out there. We don't know when the storms are coming. One just needs to look at what happened over in Texas, what's currently going on in West Virginia right now. Look at most recently with Tropical Storm Colin. We were fortunate it went much further to the north than we originally anticipated. But to our north, there was a lot of flooding.
Then why do the maps change?
The maps change because we have better technologies today when it comes to our topography and taking a look at the exact levels, if you will, from sea level.
You gave me an example earlier about how it was measured before and how it's measured now.
Yes, in the old days it was surveyors with transits and figuring out elevations. Today, back in around 2009 or 10, the state of Florida actually went through what was called the LIDAR study. It was a light-emitted radar that was done via an airplane at a specific altitude to come up with the elevations. And from the old days with surveyors, it was plus or minus 8 to 10 feet roughly. With the flyover, it's now plus or minus about 2 inches.
Ed, has anything changed in terms of our community's ability to mitigate floods when they do happen?
Well, both counties have done a lot of work with mitigation and trying to create better water flow structures, utilizing like the Celery Fields project, the Philippi Creek area. You know, so there's a lot of projects that our workers do to shift that water in different directions to kind of prevent it from going into neighborhoods. But when you get a substantial amount of rain over a short period of time, and especially at high tide, sometimes it has nowhere to go, and it just stacks up until it can flow out.
And Bob Harrigan, we talk about El Nino and the shifting weather patterns, which means that some seasons are rainier than other seasons. It's totally unpredictable. And let me ask you this, Larry, because when I purchased my home several years ago, we were informed initially that our house was in a flood area, but that designation was, and we had to buy flood insurance, but several months later, for whatever reason, that designation was removed and we didn't have to have it now, and we live substantially inward. I mean, does that happen often?
I don't think it happens too often, but you got to remember when they're surveying, when they're drawing these maps, they're not necessarily surveying every individual lot, and so there could obviously be differences between exactly what zone you're in or what zone you've been put in and the zone you're actually in. To go back to one of your questions a second ago, how do homeowners know if they're in a zone that they weren't in before? One of the most common ways we're seeing right now is banks are telling them. So their mortgage companies, if they're put into that new zone, these banks are going through and checking all their mortgages and making sure that if any of these loans that were given out that at the time they were not in a zone that required flood insurance, if they are now, they're letting them know.
And just to what degree can that impact your premium?
To go from one zone to another, oh boy. I mean, there's three main factors, and I won't go too much into pre-firm or pre-map factors, but the three main factors are going to be the zone you're in, the elevation of the lowest livable floor, and then obviously the construction of the home. And with those three factors at play, we've seen flood insurance. We've seen some policies, particularly when the Biggert Waters Flood Act, when it first went into effect, we saw policies just jumping astronomically from very small premiums of maybe a couple thousand to over 10,000.
Which would really severely impact, what homeowners could afford. I want to ask you all about one more thing, because earlier when I was talking to Bob Harrigan about this, he said it's not just the flood maps, it's the storm surge maps. The technology is also improved in terms of charting that, and that is also has a significant impact on our community's ability to deal with the severe storms when there is a storm surge. Is that not correct?
That's very correct. We actually focus in on mean sea level, and then we figure out the storm surge models. They have what they call moms and meows. Moms are maximum envelope of winds and maximum of maximums, which we have the Weather Service simulating the worst case storms and what it actually means for the water intruding onto the land.
And has that changed again over time in terms of what areas of our community and the beach areas could be most adversely affected?
Oh, definitely. In 2010, because of the LiDAR technology and the elevation.
And just explain for a moment what that is.
That light imaging detecting radar or a laser that comes down from an aircraft and gives you the elevation. Because of that technology, they were able to run a new computer model, and because of what happened in Hurricane Katrina, they ran a larger hurricane model. So that pushed the water, the storm surge water, further inland during these models. So people need to look and find out what zone they're in. Both counties have on our website a Know Your Zone tool where they can go and put in their address, and it tells them what evacuation zone they're in, which also equates to that storm surge zone. So you may not be in a flood zone, but you may find yourself that your home is in a Category A, B, or C zone.
And finally, do you find people affording themselves that opportunity to check that out?
Whenever we do presentations, we advise people to do that. I don't know how many people take advantage of that. Hopefully some of your listeners tonight will take advantage of that and find out what zone they're in. In Sarasota County, they can also find that on their tax bill or their property appraiser's notice.
All right, gentlemen, we'll have to leave it there. Thank you all for coming in tonight, and we'll be back in just a moment.